Telling a story on the internet is really difficult. Telling a hard story on the internet is incredibly difficult. And telling the hardest part of the hardest story of your entire life on the internet feels like something I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do. And yet here we are. Today's episode is really, really, really difficult. The story will not unfold the same if I don't share this episode, but I want to be honest with you and tell you if there were a way for me to get out of doing this episode, I would. We have to get through the heavy in order to have fun later, and I promise there is fun later. I'm going to drop us into the story in 2023. At this time, my children are older. I have 2 in college, 1 in high school, 1 in middle school. My work is really good. I am at Hurley House full time. I love what I get to do. I love the people that I work with. I love the way that my job is different every day. I love that I get out of the house and have something of my own that I built and created and that I get to pour into. I love the impact that Hurley House has on our local community. I just love everything about my work. My friendships, they're okay, but I would not say that I had a very vibrant social life. I had close friends, but I wouldn't say that I was experiencing a lot of fun with my friends. As far as couple friends go, we didn't have any. Or rather, we had some, but we saw them once or twice a year. There wasn't anything close to kind of like the daily regularness of a couple friend relationship. We had tried, it had never stuck, and it just wasn't part of our dynamic. I blamed it on our busy season of life. At the time, my marriage was not good. Categorically, it was unhealthy, but it was not as bad as it had been in the past. There had been times when it was worse, definitely times when it was better, but it was bad. In August of 2023, we had celebrated 23 years of marriage. Quite an accomplishment. One moment that stood out to me from that anniversary was a moment at brunch. We were sitting at a table. He took my hand, looked me deeply in the eyes, and said, "I have never felt more married to you than I do at this moment." That felt like such a sweet sentiment. It was those kinds of statements that in the middle of the hidden darkness would elicit a flicker of hope. Maybe things will get better. Maybe there's hope for this. Maybe things will change. Maybe he will change. I would cling to sentences like that in the midst of an enormous mess with all my might. Single sentences I would hold fast to try and compensate for the horror that was my everyday, all day, regular life with him. So life was not perfect, but life is rarely perfect, had never been perfect. I have experienced a lot of difficulty in life, and I've gotten really good at just putting one foot in front of the other. And so that's what I did. I kept putting one foot in front of the other. I would get knocked down. I would pick myself back up. I would do the next thing next. I would tap into my creativity. I would use my outlets. I had a very deep, rich inner life, but it was very, very out of alignment. Nothing in my life felt whole. I knew that I was a whole person, but my life did not reflect wholeness. About the same time as my 23rd wedding anniversary in August, while scrolling on TikTok, I came across an idea that really, really sparked something in me. Season theory is like a mood board, but in real life. It's this idea that you can kind of vision cast for your life of what you want your life to become moving forward. And that just like a season of television, you write out some details about who the character you are going to become. Who is she? What does she do? What does she wear? What does she like? What does she experience? Where does she need to grow? What is she going to do next? And you literally kind of script this idea of who you want to become. I loved this idea. And I went all in on the season theory. I scripted what I wanted to have happen. I thought about areas I wanted to grow and change. I cast vision for myself. I created Pinterest boards. I threw a season premiere party for some of my friends. I just went all in. Something inside of me knew so profoundly that I was about to start a new season. When I scripted my season 1, it was going to be about me tapping back into my creative roots. That while I had a family and I had a business, that really I wanted to bring my creative work to the forefront of my life in a way that I hadn't before. I had some ideas for some series I wanted to do, some videos I wanted to create, some projects I wanted to share on the internet. And I was like, this is it. Season 1 Catherine is coming to life. And I, with abandon, went all in on this idea. I didn't tell him about it. I didn't mention season theory to him. I threw the season premiere party when he wasn't there because sharing a lot of my creative ideas with him was rarely, if ever, a positive experience. There would be hints of jealousy. There would be hints of me not including him to the degree that he wanted to be included. Or there would be silence or indifference or lack of enthusiasm or support. Now, in front of people, he was my loudest cheerleader. But if no one was watching, it was a really lonely place to share my creativity with him. So I didn't. So when I look back on that version of myself, who was doing the best that she could to deal with darkness behind closed doors, who was tapping into what she had available in her toolkit of resources, I have a lot of compassion for her. Of course, season theory spoke to her. Of course, she jumped at the idea to script a different path forward, to step into the things that she could control and change while swimming in a sea of chaos and confusion and loneliness and despair. The darkness was everywhere, so of course a speck of light called out to her. I would say that that is a snapshot of how I had navigated my entire life. When I was little, when things were horrible at home, I could make something. I could write a song. I could sing. I could write in my journal. I could find a way to turn away from the darkness and turn into the light that existed within me and then make something with that light. And that's what season theory seemed like to me. So this is where I was, ready to step in to my new season, knowing in my gut it was time, scripting out what I thought was going to happen, and with my whole being facing what was coming ahead. And then on a random Friday afternoon in late September of 2023, while at work, my phone rang. It was him. And I remember sitting at my desk. I was working with my coworker on a project and the phone rang. I answered it. We talked for a few minutes. He was asking how my day was. Fine, just working on things. He asked if I had finished a meeting or something that I had referenced that I had earlier in the day. And I said, yeah, I finished. It's good. It went well. He's like, well, what are you doing now? And this is when my alarm bells started to go off. I was like, well, I'm sitting here at the table. I'm working. And he said, can you come home? And in that moment, I knew something was wrong. There was a caginess to the way he was talking that could have been explained away. Maybe he was just calling to check. But the second that he asked me, can you come home? Every cell in my body knew that something was wrong. And pretty deep down inside, part of me knew what was wrong. I don't know how to explain it on this side of it because it's easy for me to say now that I knew in that moment that my marriage was about to end. But there's a certain kind of knowing after being with someone for as long as I had been with him and experiencing the things I had experienced with him that I knew something was drastically wrong. He asked me, can you come home? I said yes. I hung up the phone and I looked at my coworker and I said, this isn't good. I said, I don't know what kind of not good this is, because I still wanted to hold out hope that it could have been a different kind of bad. It could have been someone we know had died. Someone had received terrible news. Maybe he lost his job. I knew if something bad was happening. I held out space that it might be not the kind of bad that my gut was telling me it probably was. So I looked at her and I said, this isn't good, but I don't know what kind of not good. So I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna find out. I said, I'm either gonna come back or I'm not. I said, but I'll be in touch either way. And she was like, great. So I got in my car. My house was only a mile away. And in the span of that super short drive, Every flight or fight response in me is at a high alert. My system is flooded with adrenaline. I can feel my heart beating in a way that's very pronounced. My breathing became shallow. My vision became very focused. One thing you need to know about me, because of my extensive history with trauma responses and living in a state of hypervigilance and growing up in an unsafe home and having all this darkness behind closed doors for the majority of my life, that I am actually quite calm and collected in the middle of a crisis. If something happens, I'm the person you kind of want in the room because my survival brain flips on, not in a panicky kind of a way. I know exactly what to do. I can think 3 steps ahead. I am calm and collected. My emotions are nowhere to be found. Everything that comes online is fixated on helping me survive the moment. And it's like the smartest parts of my brain, the best of my intelligence, my verbal capabilities, everything rises to the occasion, ready to win the day. And this is what happened on that very short drive home. So by the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know what, but I kind of did. And all of my resources were online. All of my survival mechanisms were redlining. I walked into my house where he was waiting. He sat down in a chair and asked me to sit down. I sat down. My face is expressionless. I am silent, and I am there just to hear what he has to say. Pause. One thing you need to know is that in 2009, he had an affair that he told me about in 2010, and which I didn't tell anyone about. The recovery process from that affair was botched at best. I learned to walk with another limp, and I did the best I could because I wasn't sure what else to do. Per usual, there was a new layer of darkness behind closed doors. Per usual, I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Per usual, I didn't feel safe and I didn't know what to do, and I just kept digging into my resources to try and survive and make it to the next day. When I sat down in that chair on that September Friday afternoon in 2023, I knew that we were about to revisit that chapter. And sure enough, when he started to speak, this is what he said. I know that you know about the affair I had in 2009, but I picked it up again in 2013 and had contact with her on and off ever since. Then I cut it off. But several weeks ago, on a business trip, I reached out to her again. Only this time, instead of responding, she told her now husband, and her now husband sent an email to me in which he told me that if I didn't tell you everything about the entire affair and the timeline and the repeated infidelity, that he was going to reach out to you and tell you himself. This is me telling you that the affair that you thought only happened in 2009 was more repeated and more frequent than you knew about. I sat in the chair, all my faculties whirring into motion, and I was very, very quiet. The literal first thought that crossed my mind was, I am not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, because I knew something was wrong. The darkness that had been building inside of our marriage for the better part of a decade, I knew something was wrong. And I had been made to feel like a crazy person for insisting that things were unhealthy. And here I was, sitting in a chair in my living room, presented with the truth. And it's like the light got switched on and I could see the entire picture for the first time. And the first thought I had was, I am not crazy. It feels good to realize you're not crazy, that you're not imagining things, that you're not delusional in the bad way, that you're not making stuff up in your head or weird to expect things to feel a certain way when they don't. It felt so good to realize I wasn't crazy. As I sat there quietly, letting my brain think, letting my body sit, comfortable with the silence. The only question that mattered occurred to me. I asked him, were you ever going to tell me the whole truth? And almost without hesitation, he said, no, I never was going to tell you. I think that was the moment that I knew. I think that was the exact moment when, out of the corner of my eye, metaphorically, I saw a crack of light coming from the smallest opening of a door. And I think that's when I knew it's time. I could tell by the look on his face, and I'm guessing, but it seemed like he knew that that question was everything. It wasn't simply the repeated infidelity. It wasn't simply getting caught. It wasn't simply the years of literal lying and misrepresenting what was going on, the denial that something was wrong, the sitting in front of counselors or friends acting like the affair had only happened in the rearview mirror when it was actively happening. It wasn't just all that. It was that he never intended to be honest with me. He always expected and intended to keep that hidden. And that kind of betrayal and dishonesty makes it impossible for any kind of trust to exist. And without trust, what's the point of a marriage? So after several minutes of silence, seeing if there was anything else I wanted to say or ask, which there wasn't, I stood up, I looked at him and I said, I'm going back to work. I'll be in touch. And he was confused. He's like, what do you mean you're going back to work? What do you mean you're gonna be in touch? What are you gonna do? What do you think? What do you say? I said, I am going back to work and I will be in touch. There is a certain kind of confidence and security that comes when the light gets flipped on and you see everything for what it actually is. All the insecurity that I carried around in my own mind and body and heart instantly dissipated. And instead, this enormous flood of confidence in myself, of groundedness in myself, of looking at myself and saying, you are right. You knew. You don't need to question yourself anymore. Go forward with confidence. You have a good heart and mind and brain. Do what you know you need to do. Full stop. And so I didn't waver. I told him I was going back to work. I told him I would be in touch. And that's exactly what I did. I went back to work. It's a testament to how unsafe I felt in my physical house that I needed to return to my place of business after hearing such detrimental news. I didn't ask him to go somewhere else so that I could remain in the structure of our house. I wanted to get out of there. I felt such darkness inside that physical structure that I wanted to be physically somewhere else in order to process this and figure out what to do next. So I went back to work. My coworker, who is also a very close friend, was the perfect place for me to land in the moment. I told her everything. She was devastated. She said, what do you need? And I said, I need to keep my hands busy while I figure out what to do next. And so we did. All of my emotions were at bay. This was still my trauma response brain. I began to move logistical pieces in place. I sent him an email. I explained what I needed and expected. I crisis managed my own crisis. So with the logistics taken care of for that exact afternoon and the weekend, I stepped into the plan and knew that he would not be around. I kept the ball in my court, that I would reach out to him when I knew what I needed next, but that I needed time to figure that out. And I didn't know how much time that was going to take. After the kids were home, everyone was fed, they were in bed for the night. I, for the first time that entire day, allowed my feelings to come back online. The overwhelming emotion that I felt that night after hearing that most of my marriage had been a complete lie, that I had been cheated on repeatedly, lied to repeatedly, gaslit for years, devastatingly wounded yet again, and on the precipice of losing the relationship that I left my family of origin and my music career for and over, wasn't sadness, wasn't anger, wasn't despair. It was relief. I felt relieved. In order to feel a sense of relief when something that categorically horrible happens is indicative of how terrible the situation was. I felt empowered. I felt confident. I felt prepared, and that felt really good. And I felt wholly undone, completely crushed, in denial, knocked over, and not quite sure what was going to happen next.